This week, conservative columnist Chad Felix Green wrote a piece over at The Federalist that I think is fantastically written, not just for its content, but because it serves as bait to prove its own point. I first heard of Chad on Steven Crowder's show, lovingly nicknamed Chad with AIDS. He's appeared several times to discuss both his experience with HIV, legal and political issues around it, and the treatment he sometimes gets from the leftist gay community specifically, and progressives more generally over his conservative politics. And according to his account, it's often vitriolic and malicious. The article is titled, "The Stigma Against My Conservative Politics is Worse Than the Stigma of Being Gay." In it, Chad describes the difficulty of growing up gay, the urging of his family to suppress his identity to avoid confrontation and conflict, and how everything he was told to fear about being openly gay has become a reality in being openly conservative. He writes, "The fear of being fired, harassed, called dehumanizing names, bullied, and denied access to public life, even violence, are all realities I face today as a conservative. The left has become empowered to actively stamp out our voices. Not just that, but they feel fully justified in doing so. But just as I realized at 16 with my sexuality, I embrace today with my political worldview. I can no more deny what I know to be objective truth than I could deny my feelings about my own sexuality then. And without direct experience, I can see where he's coming from. I don't know what it's like to be gay. Don't write any jokes in the comments. And I don't know what it's like to be conservative or libertarian in more leftist parts of this country, but I consider this issue like I had to hypothetically accept one of two dares. Would I feel safer wearing a rainbow tank top holding hands with a dude walking down a main street in the rural South, or wearing a MAGA hat in urban California? Based on my assessment of the evidence, if I had to do one of those today, I know which one I'm picking.
A Central Texas man has been arrested for attacking a teenager wearing a red Make America Great Again hat.
A man says he was assaulted downtown while urging people to vote Republican while wearing a Make America Great Again hat.
He and some buddies were at the Star offering people free pictures with a Trump cutout. While that was happening, some anti-Trump people showed up and both sides got into a verbal argument and then a violent fight broke out.
And of course, it's not as though it's all of one and none of the other, but if I'm picking, give me the rainbow tank in Mississippi, not the MAGA hat in Hollywood. And that's Chad's point. He says, just as I dreamed as a teenager of a time when I could live freely as a gay person without fear or harassment, today I hope for a future where my voice and others like me can speak freely without fear of retribution or silencing. Until then, we must never give up. We must keep fighting. They can't ban us all. Chad argues his experience as a conservative has been tougher than his experience as a gay man. And we could all go point for point debating which is worse, but that debate is beside the broader point, which is the ideal Chad is describing here. That ideal, the goal, is that everyone can speak freely. Gay, straight, conservative, liberal, whatever. That true tolerance and an open society means fundamentally that all perspectives have their place and shouldn't be punished or unfairly burdened or stigmatized. That if you oppose what you believe to be the unfair stigmatizing of gay people on the basis that everyone deserves certain rights, that everyone should include people you don't like too. To realize that goal would take just an ounce of self-awareness though, and of course for most of the leftist media environment, that's an extremely rare commodity. What I appreciate about this column is it's not just a fresh perspective on the concepts of tolerance and freedom, but through its publication, it actually provides its own evidence because many on the tolerant left took the bait to prove Chad's point, and probably none more so than our author Lauren Thiessen over at Deadspin, who responds to Chad's piece by trying to delegitimize its publisher, The Federalist, saying it's famous for defending Roy Moore and reporting in racist fashion on black crime. And it's a dumb game to play because that game, of course, works in any direction. Oh, this response article was published at Deadspin. That's just TMZ for jocks. And besides, it's a former Gawker blog. Gawker, of course, famous for violating Hulk Hogan's privacy rights and going bankrupt. Therefore, your argument is invalid. The fact that The Federalist published Chad's article is no more damaging to his case than the fact that Deadspin published yours, Lauren. So let's stick to the arguments that you're trying to support or refute. Or in this case, accidentally support. Lauren's bold, hot take headline reads, oblivious to the irony, conservative gays need to shut the fuck up. Well, case in point, you're not stigmatizing Chad. You're not telling him to shut the fuck up and that his voice doesn't matter on account of him being gay. You're doing that on account of him being conservative. Exactly the treatment he describes. But let's give Lauren the courtesy she doesn't offer Chad. Let's actually consider her case. She first argues that conservative politics should face discrimination, building a case filled with more straw men than the entire state of Nebraska. In a utopian world, she writes, nobody would care who you love, but you would and should, quote, get pretty pissed if someone came around advocating the use of tear gas against people in need, or death for sick people who don't have the money to pay for treatment, or killing machines for everybody, all of which are mainstream conservative points of view. Yeah, mainstream points of view twisted dishonestly into unrecognizable distortions. What you cite as tear gas against people in need can actually be described as humane, non-lethal enforcement of immigration law against those actively trying to cross the border illegally. What you cite as death for sick people can accurately be described as believing there are better ways to provide healthcare to those in need than government expansion and the takeover of private business and charity. What you cite as killing machines for everybody can accurately be described as security efforts to protect children like we protect all of our valuables. And all of these are perfectly defensible positions, both practically and morally speaking. You're neither irrational nor a bad person for holding them. And the idea that you ought to be shamed from society over these viewpoints is exactly the type of intolerance Chad's article speaks to. She moves on to argue that Chad has no legitimate claim to grievance since he has a big platform from which to speak, and he lives in a country where conservatives have political power. But Chad never complained about the government infringing upon him. He's talking about culture, about social and personal interaction. These are things that exist independent of partisan government control. And beyond that, Lauren's case here is self-defeating. If government power and adequate speaking platforms mean you have no legitimate concerns, how is it possible that claims of LGBT discrimination have any legitimacy? Gay rights, specifically marriage rights, are as close to a decided issue as you'll find in this country. Supporting marriage rights for gay people is a common position to hold even in conservative politics. The president himself is fine with that standard.
Do you support marriage equality?
It's irrelevant because it was already settled. It's law. It was settled in the Supreme Court.
So even if you appoint a judge that...
It's done. You have... These cases have gone to the Supreme Court. They've been settled. I'm fine with that.
The Supreme Court issued that decision after 6 years under a president who supported the issue, who actually lit the White House in rainbow colors to celebrate the decision. And since then, basically nobody has challenged it. As far as speaking platforms, there's no shortage of media outlets specifically featuring gay authors writing about gay issues. And there's no shortage of businesses looking to maximize gay inclusion either. If having friends in powerful places invalidates Chad's argument, there's at least as credible a case to be made with the same reasoning against Lauren's response. Lauren continues to bemoan how gay conservatives use their sexuality as a means to defend their abhorrent views. Their sexuality then becomes a tool to help uphold the anti-feminist, white supremacist, wealth-favoring status quo, and they need to fucking stop, she writes. Well, first off, Chad didn't do this. He never claimed to be right or correct on the basis of his sexual orientation. He simply said that his sexual orientation is not the primary source of the vitriol thrown at him. But beyond that, if the claim is that people shouldn't be believed automatically based on identity, I'm confused why this author advocates for other people to be believed automatically based on their identities. She writes, I've been discriminated against, these gay male narratives tell you. So believe me when I say that women, immigrants, trannies, and poor people aren't the real victims here. Implicit here is that these other minority groups do get that identity shield, that they are, by definition, victims. But conservative gay men are not. And why not? That shield is either fair game for everyone or no one. She closes, I know it's naive to think these dudes are ever going to shut the fuck up, but the least the rest of us could do is stop listening to them. Right. If you don't like the speech, nobody's forcing you to listen to it. If you realize that, why did you spend the last dozen paragraphs making the case that others must be silenced to accommodate you, that others should face discrimination and stigma to accommodate you. And that's the fascinating part. Fundamentally, this piece is an excellent demonstration, intentional or otherwise, of how this particular leftist perspective is not anti-discrimination. It's very pro-discrimination, in fact, admittedly so. And discrimination is only wrong if it goes against the actual priority here, the advancement of the so-called correct ideology as these authoritarians define it. And this author, she might say, well, yeah, I do favor discrimination against people for terrible ideas that they choose. I don't favor discrimination against people over their innate characteristics. And sure, go with that if you want to. But the problem is, you've just made the case that in addition to political perspective, we ought to stigmatize all sorts of behavior, we ought to stigmatize all sorts of religious beliefs, we ought to stigmatize any opinions the individual chooses that can be linked to bad outcomes. And at that point, you're making a fundamentally anti-freedom argument, an odd twist on a cause that I thought was supposed to liberate gay people to live the lives that they choose, even if those choices don't agree with you. You got the right answer in the end, Lauren. If there's stuff on the internet you don't like, just close your browser and move on with your day. But you don't get to tell others what to write. You don't get to tell me not to read it. And you don't get to demonstrate your supposed tolerance by telling others to shut the fuck up simply because you disagree with them. You only get one trap to shut in life, and that's yours. And you're free to practice what you preach anytime you want. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel always. Appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to come hang out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.